Today we go back to the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle-length discourses, to explore this sutta with the title Bhayabherava Sutta. It's another giant, given the themes that it discusses and how we see Lord Buddha addressing a very realistic question that oftentimes is overlooked or pushed to the side. And the question is dealing with, that Lord Buddha will be addressing, has everything to do with what we, especially now, live through as a world population. However, the setting was where a layperson came in and asked a question about terrors and fears, things that cause a person to be feeling threatened, terrified, and fears. His question, we'll see, has a lot to do with the monastic, or a person who's living alone, secluded, away, and in desolate wilderness areas, and how they can actually, how do they deal with fear that arises inevitably? And we will see how Lord Buddha is addressing it, this question, this very pertinent question, not just in the case of a monastic or a meditator per se, but to see ourselves in it at any capacity in life, at any with any kind of interests that we might have that might be different than, let's say, monastics. Because we all feel fear at some point. We all feel terror at some point. So this is a long sutta, which we decided that it would be better if we could do it in 2 weeks, 2 sessions, therefore, because to do it justice, instead of having to rush through it just to finish it. That's not right. So I just recently translated this, and in a way that is much more understandable, in a way that is much more pertinent to life, to our experience of fears and threats, and in the context of practice, especially, because that's what the Dhamma is all about. It is patipada, it is a path of practice. So please do not isolate yourself or remove yourself by saying, "Oh, this has to do with someone who's going out into the wilderness," type of a situation. No, we live in each of our own type of a wilderness, and we go hiding in our own wilderness or desolate areas, each in our own ways. And we have the different contracts that we have with ourselves, with life, the different things we keep telling ourselves to sedate that sense of anxiety, which stems from a state of fear. So please see yourself in that position, not necessarily a bhikkhu out there, especially living out there at the time of Lord Buddha, having lived. No. As far as we're concerned, as far as this practice is concerned, every sutta we cover need be about you. Has to be. because it is practical. That is something that we get from Lord Buddha as to what the Dhamma is. The Dhamma has to affect your life directly. It has to be about you and your growth. So it's not just an inspiring thing about someone else or some other people living in a different time period, in a different culture, in a different part of the world. No, because that would be limiting the power and the ability and the truth of the Dhamma. It has to be pertinent to your life. That's Dhamma. The Dhamma is not selective to a certain group of people in some part of history, in the past. No, that's not Dhamma. Dhamma is all the time. Lord Buddha says this beautifully. He says, whether the Tathagatas appear or not, whether the Tathagatas show up and teach the Dhamma or not, the Dhamma is always there. So it is beyond time. It is akaliko. So it is not context or situation specific. It is therefore about you, each and every one of us, in your own particular set of circumstances, to be helping you in these difficulties that you are uniquely positioned, shall we say. The Dhamma has everything to do with improving that, giving life when you feel there's none left, giving you hope when you feel there's none, giving you growth when you think, no, it's just stalemate. It's like there's nothing happening here. It's dead. No. So every single sutta that you find, especially the ones that we've been covering, every single one is targeting you and your own particular situation, circumstances, and difficulties. So please come from that position, from that point of view. So today's sutta, as I mentioned, is from the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle length discourses, and it is Majjhima Nikāya number 4, MN4. It is called, in Pali, it's Bhayabherava Sutta, which I translated as threats and fears. Let's dive in. I have personally heard this. At one time, while the Blessed One was living at the monastery offered by Anathapindika in Jeta's Park in Savatthi, the Brahmin Jāṇussoṇi came by to visit the Blessed One. After having exchanged friendly greetings, he sat down to one side and spoke these words. Good Sir Gautama, all those good sons of various families who have gone forth from the safety and security of the lay life into homelessness, by choosing to put on the bhikkhu's robes, did so freely and through the strong faith in their hearts towards the good Master Gautama. Here we have Jāṇussoṇi, whom we see on several different occasions. He was a Brahmin, he was a well-to-do Brahmin, and he was very erudite, he was very well-spoken, he was very versatile in his delivery and in his ability to poignantly find the right thing to ask. There's also the book, from the Book of the Tens, Jāṇussoṇi, the same Jāṇussoṇi is asking Lord Buddha about as to who it is that gains all these merits that we're supposed to be transferring. You know, we do it at the end of every session, or you do something good and you say, may these merits go to this person and that person, or over there. He asks another question then. We haven't yet asked the question, seen him ask the question here, but I just was reminded of another sutta where he asked this, and I've covered that some years ago in these series, I believe. The Jāṇussoṇi Sutta Number from the Book of the Tens, Anguttara Nikāya. So And Lord Buddha gives him the answer. He says, he breaks down basically the different realms into their component, major parts, major groupings, and he says, ultimately, the only ones that are the most receptive to gaining merits are the petas, are those miserable beings who are in ghostly realm. They can't do anything, and they're completely destitute. They're completely distraught, and there's nobody to help them, and they're always in need of help. A deva is not, might not be in need. And how are you transfer to them, or a human being who's already alive? Lord Buddha says categorically that you can't. But he says there is one particular set of beings. So that also we owe to Jāṇussoṇi, to be asking Lord Buddha such an important question, which is always in the back of our mind, but we never dare to ask. But Jāṇussoṇi did ask 26 centuries ago. And here is going to be another question that is coming up. So basically, first of all, he's establishing his position as far as understanding as to who the bhikkhus are, how he views them. He says, obviously, these bhikkhus that weren't bhikkhus always, they gave up their lavish lifestyle in many cases. And then they came and I mean, who does that? Who gives up all these luxuries, these conveniences, and then goes and puts on the bhikkhu's robes, which doesn't have any pattern on it? Nothing, no embellishments, no tassels, nothing glamorous about it. It's just robes, which they have to stitch together, oftentimes mending it. The only way that I see why a bhikkhu would do that, a person would do that, is because they must have a tremendous faith in you. This is my observation, he's saying. And let's see what he says after. This means they must have considered Master Gautama as the very best among teachers, or the only one able to give them the support, encouragement, and guidance that they need, looking up to and reaching out to him as the one who has already done it, having already completed the task, capital T. Thus, they now dedicate themselves to the same task to accomplish it as well, following in his footsteps. That is what a student is. A student doesn't go skulking around, doesn't go constantly for the rest of his life or her life browsing through the aisles, as they say in the supermarket, trying to look for the better deal, to look for something else that's going on out there. That is a perpetual browser, not even a student, doesn't even deserve the title of a student. That means that person is lurking about, loitering actually for the rest of one's life, thinking that they have forever, until having everything be right for them or make sense to them or figure things out. They have to figure things out first. Meanwhile, they're getting closer and closer and closer to death. But here you have a group of individuals. This is coming from a layman, Jāṇussoṇi, who has not yet taken Lord Buddha even as his teacher. This is one of those suttas where we see the beginning of the person's journey. So this is, one could say, this is the first encounter between the two, between the Brahmin Jāṇussoṇi and Lord Buddha. Because in the other suttas, one of them I just mentioned, Jāṇussoṇi comes in and calls Lord Buddha Bhante, or calls him the Blessed One. Here he's calling him, if you notice, good sir or Master Gautama. That's a respectful way of addressing someone who you don't yet consider your own teacher. And you cannot have many teachers, by the way. You can only have one genuine teacher, which I notice a lot. It's been happening today. The opposite of shopping around, getting the better deal. No, that's not a student. But here he's saying, these people have chosen you because they've seen that there's a difference between you and other teachers, and you are the most excellent for them, at least. That's why they chose you. They're not with Sanjaya, they're not with Nigantanatha Putta Mahavir over there. They're not with all these other people. They're with you. Many of them actually came from really top as in very respected teachers in those days in India. And this was like the golden era of Indian philosophical schools, mind you. But they left them, their teachers, and came to Lord Buddha for a reason. That's what he's saying. That's my observation is saying. Then the Blessed One said, "So it is, O Brahmin, for all that you just exclaimed is true, so true indeed. Truly, all those good sons of various families have gone forth from the safety and security of the lay life into homelessness, and chose to put on the bhikkhu's robes through their free will and strong faith in their hearts towards the Tathagata. This means that they have taken me as the very best among teachers, the only one able to give them the support, encouragement, and guidance they need, looking up to and reaching out to me as the one who has already done it, having already completed the task. And to this end, they now dedicate themselves to the same task, in order to accomplish it as well by following in my footsteps." So Lord Buddha approved of what Jāṇussoṇi just said. Now Jāṇussoṇi goes to his primary question. That was also kind of like a question. When someone makes a statement in the presence of Lord Buddha, usually they will pause to get the confirmation. Sometimes Lord Buddha confirms it, approves of it by his silence. And other times, like we just saw, he confirms it with a repetition of the statement, especially when he's putting in, the qualifier that, yes, you are right. Then the Brahmin Jāṇussoṇi continued speaking. However, having said that, Master Gautama, the fact remains that living in far-off and utterly secluded locations, as in the wilderness or desolate and uninhabited areas of forests or jungles, can be truly difficult, if not impossibly challenging for most. So one could only imagine how terribly difficult it must be for someone to attain in samadhi, once having moved away from the world into the seclusion of remote jungles, because such wilderness might very well drive a person mad, as the mind could easily be plagued with agitation due to imagining things that aren't true or real while being so alone. Can you relate to that? With that? If you've ever stepped foot into a forest, which, especially one that doesn't have a trail, doesn't have a clear path, which most forests these days in inhabited areas, generally speaking, have some type of marker, some type of trails. But what if, even with a trail, but if it gets dark, or you don't hear any people's voices around you, either ahead of you or behind you, and you're not listening to music, let's say you're not listening to your, I don't know, earbuds or whatever, and you're listening to the sound of the forest, for a time it's nice, but for many people after that, they become overwhelmed with the sense of fear. But what if you're actually living there, where there's no people around? So this is also addressing that area of our lives, or the attitude we have to always have around us companions, or some voice, some sound, at least turn on the radio. Even the annoying neighbors over there, they might actually be comforting to know that you're not alone when everybody else is gone, let's say. These are very subtle but sneaky ways for the mind to find some kind of a solace, some type of safety in knowing that you are not alone. That is the big one. That's the reality here. which the forest allows you to feel, to experience. But he's saying, well, this can drive a person mad, Bhante. So let's see what Lord Buddha is going to respond with. The Blessed One then responded, "And so it is, O Brahmin, for all that you just exclaimed is true, Brahmin. So true indeed. For there is the fact that living in far off and utterly secluded locations, as in the wilderness or desolate and uninhabited areas of forests, can indeed be truly difficult, if not impossibly challenging for most. This because it can be terribly difficult for some to attain to samadhi once having moved away from the world into the seclusion of remote jungles, because such wilderness might very well drive a person mad, as the mind could easily be plagued with agitation due to imagining things that aren't true or real while being so alone. After all, Brahmin," this is where Lord Buddha is going to be giving. So he agreed with him. Yes, that's a problem, he says, for most. And now he's going to come from his own experience as to how he dealt with it. After all, Brahmin, back when I was still struggling, not yet having attained to awakening, I also used to think, how terribly difficult it must be for someone to attain to samadhi once having moved away from the world into the seclusion of remote jungles, because such wilderness might very well drive a person mad, as the mind could easily be plagued with agitation due to imagining things that aren't true or real while being so alone. So here's where Lord Buddha is going to be clearly distinguishing himself from all the others. So I titled this section as Differences Between the Buddha and Others when Resorting to the Seclusion of Remote Wilderness. Excuse me. And here we go. But later, Brahmin, I began reflecting carefully how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners living with unclean hearts, who behave without virtue, whether through their thoughts, words, or bodily actions, who do go into seclusion by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. Now, as a result of their behavior in non-virtuous living and their impure hearts, they attract to themselves lower states of being such as guilt, worrisome thoughts, and unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. When we do not live with virtue, when things get quieter for us, let's say there's no distractions, where we're not occupying our time with other things to muffle the noise, then these things will come up. And here the noise would be the noise or loud feelings of remorse that come up because of the non-virtuous life that we've been living. But what we have is a society that is so inundated with noise. There's TV in your room, there's TV on your phone, there's always something online, always. All you have to do is log in. All these have been creating so much more non-virtuous living for us. The world is without sila today, everywhere you look. Why? Because it starts with each individual. People are not sitting with at least some space, within some space, to explore as to whether they did live with virtue or they did not that day. They don't have time that they're spending on probing their attitudes about something. How was my speech? How was my thought? How was my body? Action. We don't do that anymore. At least people used to go to churches or something in the West once a week, and they would at least have some sense of like, okay, let me go do like a confession booth and things like that. Even that has much benefit. Modern day, you could say people go to therapy, but even that has become convoluted because the therapist is simply listening. They don't provide you with any solutions. Ultimately, many of the modern day schools of therapy, there's no direction, there's no guidance often. So what is the person left with? More thoughts and more tendencies to go ahead and again engage. So the guilt, when it's not being looked at properly, the remorse, when it's not being looked at properly, what it turns into? A darker and more disgusting phenomenon called fear, terror. It had a place to start from. It stemmed from the non-virtuous behavior of the person. So Lord Buddha is saying, while I saw that there were people like that, yogis who are not pure, immoral. And then he continues, however, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I went and removed myself from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, I was not dwelling with an unclean heart. Unclean heart. It's important that when we sit to practice, whether it's in a desolate wilderness area, in the middle of the desert, or in the middle of the jungle, that is secondary or tertiary in importance, the location. What is important is how your heart, where your heart is seated. Is there a fight going on? And the fight is going to happen when there is the absence of cleanliness, purity in the heart. Because the lies will pop up, they will show up. You will not be able to hold them down, like to suffocate the truth of what you've done, what you've said, what you've thought. And that's why a lot of people don't like to be alone, even in the middle of a society. They want to be surrounded by actual people who would muffle the inner cries. This is not poetic something I'm trying to, conjure up. No, this is the state of the heart that is unclean. And Lord Buddha is saying you cannot meditate without a pure heart. At least work to purify it. Therefore, he says, I saw that unlike those individuals, I lived and behaved with virtue, whether through my thoughts, words, or bodily actions. Thus, I lived with purity in my heart. So, as a result of my behavior in virtuous living and the purity of my conduct, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelled in peace and an abounding sense of safety within. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, living with virtue and purity in every aspect of my behavior, living comfortably in peace while having gone into seclusion within those remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. In Pali, the word Bhaya can be translated as terror, sometimes fear. When you put the negating prefix, all of a sudden it becomes the opposite. You can even translate it as safety, even though it was terror. Safety, now it became safety, but it's not a word situation. We're a word, we're not playing on words. There's life behind it, such as with wisdom, right? You're applying your wisdom to ask yourself, have I done anything wrong? Sometimes all you have to do is ask yourself that. Why am I feeling so distraught? Why am I feeling so agitated? And usually, if you haven't done anything that you can recall, the mind will go into the past, far distant past, as far as you can remember, and it will pluck out one or two incidents, and it will highlight those and bring them into the present and ruin the present for you. And that also will dirty the pure heart. Why? Because now that has become on your projection screen of awareness. Now you're looking at that instead of your breath, for example, instead of really taking in the atmosphere, the rustling of the leaves in the forest, the wind blowing through the branches, the creek, the water flowing, let's say. You can't take any of those in because you're somewhere else. You are in Papancha land. Why? Because the sannyas have dominated your reality. They have camouflaged your reality. You are not seeing things for what they are. And that's why a lot of people will pack up and leave. Sometimes people have left. I remember one time I was doing a retreat, in a group retreat in Joshua Tree Desert in California, America, US. And a man who had been meditating in Zen tradition for many, many, many years, apparently, who was so adamant, so excited, all of a sudden I see him sneaking out after 3-4 days. I was like, is that you? And he saw me seeing him and he felt caught. So he had to come face up, so he came and he just like, I have to leave because I'm not feeling so. I said, is there anything I can do? Is there anything we can help you with? I wasn't the teacher running the retreat then. I was just, but he had come to me a few times asking for help, this and that. And he's like, no, I just can't stand it. I can't, okay, like, I have to get away. I was like, okay, breathe, drink some water, and when you're ready, drive. He couldn't handle it. This was like after decades of meditation practice. So what are you sitting with is extremely important. And are you being fair to yourself? Or are you simply giving your imagination, your constantly perpetuating concepts, an arena to go outside, to come outside and play? And that's not the place for them to do anything. Because you've taken time and you've secluded yourself in the forest in this beautiful space you've created for yourself. So we have to be realists at this point and say, do I have sila in my heart? And if so, then all these don't matter. Am I breaking any sila here, sitting here, not bothering anyone? No? Okay, so this is already, I'm on, it's a good start. But let's see what Lord Buddha says. So he's going to be drawing a lot of comparing and contrasting here to show Jāṇussoṇi, who is a Brahmin, who is not an upasaka yet, who is not a lay disciple yet. He hasn't taken Lord Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha as his refuge yet. So he's trying to see what Lord Buddha is all about by asking him not a sneaky question, but an accurately, realist question. Something that's important to him, and which can tell us also, by the way, that perhaps he also tried to seclude himself. And oftentimes he had to deal with this because he was a realist, as I said, practical person. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was something that he had to deal with again. So let's go. Second point. Furthermore, Brahmin, I continued reflecting on how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners engaging in an unclean livelihood, obtaining their support through an impure lifestyle, even though they go on resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. Now, as a result of their livelihood being non-virtuous and their impure hearts, they attract to themselves lower states of being such as guilt, worrisome thoughts, and unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. So when you have an impure heart, such as uh, ridden with guilt, remorse, etc., the outcome of that will not be a wholesome state, such as tranquility of mind. It will be impossible. Impossible, which is why a lot of people nowadays, because of their non-virtuous life, these are the practitioners now I'm talking about, the meditators, or at least some people who have tried meditating seriously for some time and gained some fruits here and there, but because of them resorting back to a non-virtuous life, life that is depleted of any virtue, any sila, in order for them to gain some depth of meditative experience, guess what they are resorting to? Mushrooms and other psychedelics, drugs. This took a while for me to digest because of what this meant, what this means, because people have really dropped Dhamma and gone to the Adhamma way of living. And that's no living, if you ask me, because they've gone from bad to worst. And that's a reality. And again, here he's referring to the livelihood being wrong. So these are not people who are living truthfully, earning their living. And yes, some people have heard saying, well, bhikkhus don't earn a living. That's bogus. That's not true, because we do earn a living. We are placed in society by Lord Buddha to live the Dhamma, to preserve the Dhamma, to teach the Dhamma, to share the Dhamma, to grow with the Dhamma through our practice, which is primary. Number one, all the rest come from that. Now, when it is not there, which by the way has to have sila at its core, when it's not there, people are giving us donations, people are bringing food, people are asking, how are you, Bante? How are you? Can I help you with this, that, Ajahn? Can I? When the person is not practicing sila, samadhi, panya, then the support they were earning, that's the livelihood part, because that's how laity protect the Dhamma, that's how they protect the Sangha, and that's how essentially they're protecting themselves. But if the person they're wholeheartedly are protecting isn't living with the Dhamma, then that person is having a wrong livelihood. You look around and you see this. But here, Lord Buddha is saying, well, I looked around and I saw that, he's saying. Naturally, the person, when they go to the wilderness, they're going to have some issues, because the food they got, the bowl of rice, the bowl of this, and the robes that people gave them, because, hey, they're walking around naked, or they're barely, they don't have any shoes. Their hair is all like, disheveled. So, wow, they're looking, pretty desperate. So let me give him this, let me give him that. So Lord Buddha is addressing those. And remember, he's talking about a time period when he was not yet a Buddha. He hadn't become one. He hadn't attained to Nibbana. So when we think of recluses, we immediately think real, hardcore, truly practitioner. Not necessarily, because we do have a bias, especially as lay people. We have a bias between when a person says, oh, I'm a religious person. Wow, we just put them in a different category. But we're not being realists. We're not being really careful. Let me look. Let me observe. What type of a recluse is this? Maybe it's just by name. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, I did not engage in any kind of non-virtuous or impure livelihood. Therefore, I saw that unlike those individuals, I obtained my livelihood and support through a pure lifestyle that was virtuous, and thus I lived with purity in my heart. So, as a result of my livelihood being virtuous and the purity of my lifestyle, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelt in peace and an abounding sense of safety within. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, engaging in clean livelihood and purity in every aspect of my life, and thereby living comfortably in peace while having gone into seclusion in those remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, where I kept experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. This is a healthy way of doing a comparing and contrasting. This is not the mana as the Sangyojan or the fetter that we stay away from, comparing the conceit, basically. This, you can say, it's a healthy way when Lord Buddha, well, as a person in quest of awakening still at the time, was saying, I'm one of the noble ones. So this is key for you to compare yourself to someone better than you, someone that you truly hold tremendous respect towards. And you look at your life and you're doing a compare and contrast here, not to place yourself above, below, equal to, no, just to give yourself some support to pull yourself out of the ditch of misery. Because the tendency is the mind will come and say, oh, how could you? You don't even deserve the place to sit there, to sit under that tree, which was what Mara said, right? The night of Lord Buddha's awakening. By what right are you sitting there? You don't have the right to sit there under the Bodhi tree to attain awakening. He actually said that. Mara, challenging Lord Buddha. So if he didn't have the confidence that I've earned every right to be here, what are you talking about? So every once in a while, when you're in that state, in that hole, in that dark place where you feel like you're being pulled in and you're not growing, and there's this slight presence of conceit in the form of like, I am less than, oh, I should have been as good as they. No. Check, like Lord Buddha started, with virtue. Check your virtue. Have I broken any sila? Today, at least. No? Okay, that's enough for me to celebrate in tranquility. Next, is that a quality that is seen and observed in even the Arahants, in Lord Buddha? Yes. If it's pure, definitely, then you see it also in Lord Buddha and the Arahants. Okay. But that already is clearing up the air around you. You see how Lord Buddha's using the comparing and contrasting method of pulling yourself out and also encouraging you to not beat yourself up with untruths, with the sannyas that keep wanting to invade and take over your life and stop you from attaining samadhi, which is essential. Then, Brahman, I pondered further on how there are recluses in Brahmin religious practitioners who live with a fervent desire for sensuality, remaining covetous in their hearts for experiencing sensual pleasures, even though they go on resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. Now, as a result of their covetousness and deep desire in their impure hearts, they attract to themselves lower states of being such as guilt, worrisome thoughts, and unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. Excuse me. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, Whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, I did not live with a heart that was impure nor drenched in desire for sensual pleasures at all. Thus, I saw that unlike those individuals, I lived without any coveting for things, for no desires were left in me for sensuality, there being only virtue and purity in my heart. Again, using a healthy way of looking at oneself in a, objective manner, in this sense. Is my mind still left in the village? Let's say after you've come back from Pindabat and you saw rich people walking around in their fancy robes, fancy sandals or fancy shoes, playing around with their children, let's say, or you saw some women at the watering hole, or some of them looked at you, maybe one of them looked at you, or you wanted them to look at you, but you're here, you're still looking at them miles away. That is sensuality. Or you smelled some food being prepared and you're all of a sudden taken back and it's like, oh yes, that's what my mommy used to prepare for me, or my wife or one of my wives used to prepare for me. What am I doing walking into the desert? Oops, I stepped on a twig, sharp, what am I doing? Look at my friends over there, they're having a blast. I'm not, this is misery. What is that? That was not happening with Siddhartha Gautama. For others, it does, because your goal, the meaning has to be strong for you to be there. The purpose for you to be walking barefoot in this example I gave has to be strong. The need for you, there needs to be a powerful need, a strong desire for you to go back to the forest, in this case, and to meditate, far outweighing any of the stuff that you saw in the village. If they were that great, you wouldn't have left in the first place. But you never asked yourself that, do you? Something must have driven you out of your home, the arms of your wife or loved one. You left for a reason. Such recluses do not recall those reasons, and they just have to follow along, okay, push themselves, just, haul themselves through, and have this persona now to defend. Oh, I'm a recluse, I'm a yogi, I'm a bhikkhu, I'm a this or I'm a that. Meanwhile, it's absolutely empty inside. It's a dead skeleton of darkness. They're not living the Dhamma. It's just a role they're playing because they've invested too much into this. So if they leave that and go back to society, everybody's going to laugh at them. So might as well just stay and play this role type of a deal. For many, 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 many people, that's what it is. And that's what it was at the time of Lord Buddha, even before he became Lord Buddha. This because so as a result of the purity of my heart, which was free from any desire for sensual pleasures, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelled in peace and an abounding sense of safety within. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, living in purity and without any desire to be experiencing sensuality or coveting anything. And thereby I lived comfortably in peace while in seclusion in those remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, while experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. Then, Brahmin, I pondered further on how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners who live with avaricious minds, with hatred and evil dwelling in their hearts, even though they may go and resort to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. You will find a lot of crazy people, angry people in the wilderness, desert, in remote places. Not every person you find in desolate areas is like a wise, Lao Tzu or somebody sitting there meditating. Not everyone is like that's very, very difficult to find. Why? Because most people are running from something. We never consider that possibility, right? There's a lot of avarice or hatred or anger in many people's minds, even though they're supposed to be dedicating their lives to purer lifestyle, the pure goal of awakening, which means you need to drop everything. Now, as a result of the ill will in their impure hearts, they attract to themselves similar lower states of being, such as guilt, worrisome thoughts, and unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, I was never evil-minded, nor did I seclude myself with a heart that was impure, with hatred or contention at all. We have a perfect example, at least one, with Devadatta, right? He was full of avarice, full of hatred, despite the fact that he was wearing the bhikkhu's robes. Every day he was planning how to overtake or do a coup d'etat, as it were, of the Sangha by replacing Lord Buddha. Imagine the evil, the ill will that he had in his heart. This is, this is not something we see in stories only. Thus, I saw that unlike those individuals who dwell with hearts that are sullied by ill will, I, on the other hand, was living with a heart that was in the virtuous presence of universal, benevolent, loving kindness, metta. As purity in my heart was radiating with metta. So, as a result of the purity of my heart that was full of universal, benevolent, loving kindness, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelled in peace and an abounding sense of safety within. When the view is wrong, when the person has wrong view, including something as pure as metta can be completely sullied, not metta basically at all. People these days practice metta left and right, up and down, everywhere you look. It's it has become the thing. Jhanas and then metta, this and that. My question is always the same question that I saw being asked by Lord Buddha 26 centuries earlier. Before you make a decision, go and look at them, their behavior, especially if you have the opportunity to go and look at them close hand and for a long time, and then speak, and then make up your mind about whether they are practicing or not. I've had my share of so-called metta practicing or teaching teachers. I would see them in action. I would really struggle looking for metta there. There was none. There was avarice. There was hatred. There was disgust, not towards life in general, but towards people, certain people. But where's the metta? And then from such teachers, you're going to have students who are going to, in turn, go and teach metta. Well, if it's a bad tree, the fruit's going to be reflecting that. If you have a mango tree, you're not going to get lemon. Okay? You're not. You're not going to get radishes. You're not going to get grapes from a mango tree. You're going to get mango. If you have a plant that produces bitter gourd, you're not going to get plums or strawberries. You're going to get bitter gourd. Even if you paint the plums or the bitter gourd like plum color or something, it's still going to taste bitter. But people back then didn't understand it. People now, they don't understand that you cannot use the bucket of paint called metta to camouflage your hatred. It's not going to work. You might carry yourself in such a way where people will go, wow, he or she is so full of metta. And then you spend some time, close time with them and see and observe, or interact with them if you're lucky, just briefly, and your intuition will tell you, oh, she's full of something else, but not metta. That's not metta. Your heart will know. You do not need to be a practitioner for 1,000 years to know and recognize metta. Even a chick, even a tiny little lizard or a gecko knows metta. Okay? When it encounters metta. So you can't cover it. You can't cover it definitely with Dhamma terms, Dhamma language. It still will remain adhamma. Lord Buddha says, this because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones living in purity while radiating the powerful presence of metta throughout. And thereby I dwelled comfortably in peace as I went into seclusion, resorting to remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, while experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. Another word about metta. Metta never works as a pressure cooker or some type of a extra weight that you put on something so it doesn't blow up, like a lid on top of a volcano. Metta is never a lid to cover up something else that's going on underneath. It's never even a band-aid. Never. So please bear that in mind. Metta exudes, juts out of the heart that is experiencing tranquility and joy. There's Dhamma through and through in the person, even if they don't recognize what Dhamma is. They don't know what it is, but they're feeling it, they know it intuitively, they know it. They're full of it, of metta, and it's permeating everywhere. So tension is not there. Tightness is not there. It cannot be. There's joy there. There's peace, and those around you will never feel fear. That's the best way that I can think of right now to tell you about metta as to how to recognize. You must never feel fear around the person who has metta. The opposite has to happen. No intimidation at all, which many people, in the case of teachers, would translate that as to, oh, I'm being respectful. No, it's fear. It's bhaya. Because you're afraid what this monster could turn out to do afterwards if you rub them the wrong way. If you say something, where is metta? So, please bear that in mind. Then, Brahmin, I reflected further how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners whose minds are overwhelmed by drowsiness and absent-minded dullness, sometimes called sloth and torpor, dominated by the powerful grip that these two hindrances of sloth and torpor have on their practice, even though they may go and resort to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. So they fall asleep. They're absent-minded. They cannot maintain sati for whatever reason. Now, well, because of hindrances, yeah. Now, as a result of the strong presence of drowsiness and absent-minded dullness, they attract to themselves similar lower states of being, such as guilt, worrisome thoughts, and unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. Sankharas have everything to do with the bringing up of terrors and fears. Remember, you cannot point the finger at sankharas and say, you are responsible. I have to make you disappear. I have to fight you. Who sent you? Mara must have sent you. No, Mara's too busy doing other stuff. Your sankharas have actually been set in motion by you, thanks to kamma. Whose kamma? Your kamma, meaning intentional actions you and I have committed. That is behind the sankharas that we are facing, that show up. Now, if you have sloth and torpor, if you have drowsiness and absent-minded dullness, not just when you're sitting, by the way, this is key. Not just when we do not practice only when we're sitting. No, we're practicing all the time. Walking, sitting, getting up, talking to people, doing some business transactions, calculations. We are supposed to be practicing even then, especially then. Now, sankharas will be brought to life, will be animated further, will become crystallized and almost 3D, become living again, thanks to the non-presence of sati, meaning asati. Why? Because you're absent-minded. And that's when all the rats of yesterday come in, the sankharas, the bad feelings that we have, including guilt or terrifying situations, which you do not have any clue as to where they might be from, as to what incident, what event, in what lifetime happened. But for you, it is as real as it is happening now, all of a sudden. Why? Because you had let go of Yoniso Manasikara. There is no sati. Sati will block the door. At least it will say, what are you doing? I see you, Sankara. At least sati will say that. And then Yoniso comes in. You're like, oh, I have to block this door. And then your panya comes in. Okay, I have to block it. That way you can stop the armies of sanya that are waiting to invade, take over your time sitting. This is how you start blocking the entryway of sannyas from bringing in more of that emotional texture that sankharas have. That's what the sannyas need. Sannyas are just concepts, perceptions, but they need that feeling quality, that emotional quality which sankharas can bring. They're not things out there. They're part of you because you've lived them, lived past tense. But if you are maintaining sloth and torpor, that means they can just waltz into your present life and take on the present as if they are really happening now. So yoniso manasikara, starting with sati, mindfulness, will question all that and put the spotlight on it, and all of a sudden the sankhara is dissipated. It's gone. It's gone. Why? Because the light of Dhamma, through yoniso manasikara I was referring to, blasts it away. You will never be able to deplete, get rid of all the sankharas, one after the other, like the Jains are still trying to get rid of their kamma. It's impossible. But your mind can be so sharp that the moment it arises, you maintain the presence of living in purity. Those sankharas have nothing to do with you living this life, this moment, if you're living it with Dhamma. Sankharas only have an opportunity to take over, to even dominate a portion of your day when you are no longer with the Dhamma, meaning you are with the khandas, the aggregates. When you have the 5 aggregates as your steering wheel, you're basically in Sankhara land, in Papancha land. How in the world are you going to sit in meditation and getting to Samadhi? It's impossible. The Sankharas will never take you to Nibbana. The Sankharas will never take you to even Samadhi. Just like the khandas will never take you to Nibbana, to release from suffering, to Vimutti. It's not their forte. That's not what they're there for. They're there to ruin your chances from attaining liberation. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, I was free from those 2 obstacles that hinder one's progress, as I secluded myself with a heart that was sharply alert and thus completely untouched by either drowsiness or absent-minded dullness. Thus, I saw that unlike those individuals who dwell with hearts that are hindered by sloth and torpor, I was living with a heart that was bright, with full awareness, sharp and clear throughout. Excuse me. So as a result of the purity of my heart that was untouched nor obstructed by either of those two hindrances, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelled in peace and an abounding sense of safety within. Do you see the beauty of the teaching that Lord Buddha is imparting here to Jāṇussoṇi? Nowhere do you see an other being coming in, some revelation that's happening, or some other being, higher being, and coming down and protecting Siddhartha Gautama from these terrors. Nowhere do you see that. If you want to know anything about empowerment, then here it is. The Dhamma is the greatest empowering agent, because it allows you to empower yourself and to reach the highest empowerment, and that is state of attaining liberation from suffering, which is Nibbana. That is empowerment. Nothing else. Everything else is not. That is the only empowerment, true empowerment, because everything else is subject to conditions. Everything else is subject to impermanence. Therefore, suffering. Suffering. Anything other than the Dhamma is suffering. That's why the khandhas can only bring you suffering. The sannyas can only bring you suffering. The sannyas can never bring you awakening, can never bring you freedom. That's why when we sit to meditate, we need to make sure, am I working with sannyas here or not? Because many of us work with sannyas. Okay, this is going to happen. If this happens, I'm going to address it with this, and then if that shows up, I'm going to attack it with this, and if that hindrance shows up, I'm going to target it with this laser beam of this type of a thing, and then this Dhamma principle, and it's like, you're gone. You're in Sanya land. That's not Dhamma. Yes, it's part of the teaching. Yes. But you need it just enough. Too much salt will kill a person. Just enough. Pull back, and see for what it is, and just, because it will also turn it into agitation and restlessness. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, living in purity and with full awareness, free from both drowsiness and absent-mindedness, and thereby I lived comfortably in peace, while having gone into seclusion, resorting to remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, while experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. Furthermore, Brahmin, I reflected on how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners whose hearts are agitated, and thus they live in a constantly restless state of mind, even though they may go and resort to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. Now, as a result of their unsettled minds, dwelling in such a restless state, they attract to themselves similar lower states of being, such as guilt, worrisome thoughts, and unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. By the way, sometimes I've noticed people trying to push away the fear through the chanting that they do. That's not going to help much, because it's almost like a child closing their ears and screaming and yelling, ah, la, 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 and just trying to make this thing go away. You won't learn anything. Again, you're camouflaging. Even if you're sitting in the middle of a Buddhist temple, surrounded by monks, and you're chanting, while fear is there, that is not going to relieve your fear, your terror. It's like, again, putting a Band-Aid over a Niagara type of a gushing, bleeding wound. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, my heart remained free from and immune to restlessness. The mind was settled and balanced as I secluded myself with a heart that was sharply alert and thus completely untouched by agitation. Thus, I saw that unlike those individuals who dwell with a heart that was agitated and a mind that thus unsettled and anxious, I, on the other hand, was living at peace with a heart that was settled and contented throughout. So, as a result of the purity, because from the agitation it's impossible to experience samadhi, but from the state of contentment, you are definitely on the road to experiencing samadhi, because contentment is a requirement. The ending, the elimination of agitation is also a requirement, but not the perpetuation of agitation. So, as a result of the purity of my heart that was untouched by either agitation or restlessness, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelled in peace and an abounding sense of safety within. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, living in purity and peace, with the mind perfectly settled and tranquil, and without any agitation or restlessness in the heart. Thus, I lived comfortably and at peace while having gone into seclusion, resorting to remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, while experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. Furthermore, Brahmin, I reflected on how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners who live with doubts and uncertainties in their hearts, even though they may go and resort to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. By the way, if you noticed, the qualities that he's pointing out, or the defiling states of the heart, Lord Buddha is referring to, are, at least the last five, are the five hindrances. So he's referring to those. So these are not things that you simply see or encounter while you're sitting to meditate. They are happening all throughout your life. So please don't reserve working with the hindrances only when you're sitting to meditate, because that's going to create agitation. You should have already done most of the work in your waking hours through sati, not when you're sitting to meditate. That's not your laboratory for you to be engaging with these hindrances. They do show up, they will show up, yes, but you must have already done your work, the hand-to-hand combat, as it were, with the hindrances, while you're awake, away from the cushion. Already, you must have done a lot of work there. But what people do is they don't do anything when they're awake, when they're doing their life, and then come back to sit down to meditate, and they're now putting on their boxing gloves, creating all this tension, restlessness, fighting. And then, oh, time's up, I got to get up. No. If you did that, the moment will come. And if you've done it properly, yes, the hindrances will dissipate and vanish for a while. But now what do? You need to sit and practice, because now finally you have some quiet. But they're like, oh yeah, but Bhante, I only wanted 1 hour of sitting. I can only do that. But yeah, but you spend an hour in the boxing ring with the hindrances. How's that sit going to help you then? Now you have this opportunity. Now, as a result of their skeptical doubts, dwelling in such a state of uncertainty, they attract to themselves similar lower states of being, such as confusion, worrisome thoughts, and other unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, my heart was free from all doubts and uncertainties. Therefore, I lived without any confusion in my mind, as I secluded myself with a heart that was beyond all doubt, confident and secure. Thus, I saw that unlike those individuals who dwell with hearts that are uncertain and full of doubts, I, on the other hand, was living with a heart that was free from such qualities completely. There's a certain, well, there's a certainty, there's a clarity. There's a clarity of purpose as to why I'm doing this, why I'm in the jungle, why I'm in my room. Remember, that could be your jungle. When you have a very, very busy life and you somehow manage to have 10, 15 minutes by yourself, for yourself, and you sit there upstairs in the attic or somewhere in the car, that is your wilderness. But you must have a very strong, clear purpose as to why you're doing this. That means there needs to be an absence of doubt. And this is also plays in beautifully with what I was saying earlier about choosing a teacher, singular. You can't keep roaming from one thing, otherwise you're just like a shopper at the mall, shopping mall, going from one thing to the next, trying to look for the best deal until the other one shows up. There's no such thing because your mind is completely lost in uncertainties and doubts. No amount of data will ever get rid of those doubts. Impossible. So, as a result of the purity of my heart that was untouched by skeptical doubts, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelt in the peaceful state of having gone beyond all doubt and uncertainty. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, living in purity, having gone beyond all doubt with direct understanding, where the mind was also immune to all kinds of skeptical doubts, without any uncertainty in the heart. Thus I lived comfortably at peace, while having gone into seclusion, resorting to remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. I'll do two more. Furthermore, Brahmin, I reflected on how there are recluses and Brahmin religious practitioners who live to uh, to denigrate others, but while at the same time seeking to gain fame and glory, even though they may go and resort to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness. Now, as a result of their demeaning and contentious attitude towards others, they attract to themselves similar lower states of being, such as confusion, worrisome thoughts, and other unwholesome states, which manifest in the form of threats and fears that come to haunt them night and day. However, I saw that in contrast to those recluses or Brahmin religious practitioners, whenever I moved away from the world by resorting to remote jungles or uninhabited parts of the wilderness, my heart was free from all contentious thoughts or longing to criticize or belittle others. Therefore, I lived without any confusion in the mind, as I secluded myself with a heart that was free from contention or the desire to demean or denigrate others. Thus, I saw that unlike those individuals who dwell with hearts that were full of contention and disapproval of others, I, on the other hand, was living with a heart that was free from such qualities of contention or wanting to place myself above all others. So, as a result of the purity of my heart that was untouched by contention or the desire to demean or denigrate others, I did not attract to myself any lower states of being, as the case was with those other individuals. Instead, I dwelled in the peaceful state of having gone beyond all such negative tendencies. This because I saw that I too was one of the noble ones, living in purity, having gone beyond all bitter contention, or the desire to elevate oneself while demeaning or belittling others. Thus I lived comfortably at peace, while having gone into seclusion, resorting to remote jungles and uninhabited parts of the wilderness, experiencing restful non-agitation in the heart, remaining still, supremely confident and secure. I'm thinking to stop here for today's session. So sadhu, sadhu. We'll continue from this one next week, because each of these points that Lord Buddha is highlighting is, as you know, as you can tell, is supremely important. By the way, given the last criterion Lord Buddha was saying about those who have the desire to put down others, to bring them down, that's their raison d'être, as they say in French, like the reason for being. And you see this exactly in the contemporaries of Lord Buddha's, like Mahavira or Nigantanataputta. The man was on a mission to destroy Lord Buddha, even though he is revered today as a Buddha by the Jains. The man actually was conniving, he was setting people up, and we've seen already several suttas, one of them being Upali Sutta, the layperson Upali, the prince, who was sent by Mahavira to go and trap Lord Buddha or try to, beat him in a debate, and then this and then that. And then another prince, Bhayabherava Sutta, the same thing. These were devout Jain practitioners. And then it makes you think, like, didn't this person have like a job to do, like awaken? I mean, as a founder of he called himself a Tathagata, by the way. So he was beyond anything. He knew he was omniscient. And you have the other ones too. Ajita Kisakambali, Sanjaya, Belataputta, and the other one, there's several. But you see how there is this drive, like Devadatta from the Sasana's life, right? They didn't practice. Their goal was simply I need to topple him. And that's how my life will be. And you see this today also. You see this in, on the superficial level and world politics, this and that. But you also see this in the world of practitioners and even, Buddhist clergy, if you will. But Lord Buddha is saying, I was above that. Like, well, that's not the purpose why I disrobed as a king, as a crown prince, and robed myself in the bhikkhu's robe. That's not why I did that. What a sublime statement. What a beautiful statement. Puts things back into perspective. And in a way, in many ways, actually, I see that as such a powerful encouragement to each and every one of us. So this is not about a bhikkhu going into the forest to practice, as I hope you could see it. This is about us, because every one of us goes through these difficulties, these challenges. Can you pull yourself out of the garbage can and say, of nasty negative emotions every once in a while you fall into, and say, wait, am I being fair? How is my sila? When all else fails, ask yourself that. How is my virtue? How is my virtue? When I look at my neighbors, do I have any secretive, conniving, impure thought, covetousness, anything like that? Or when I'm smiling to them, I'm genuinely smiling to them. When I say, I wish you a wonderful day, am I really saying that? Okay, how many people do you know who actually pause to consider such facts? Okay, guess what? You're one of the noble ones. You do not have to be an arahant to be one of the noble ones, by the way. A piece of pure white cloth will still have the same purity as a kilometer square white cloth. So can you see yourself that way, though? Instead of looking at the other stuff, the tiny little dots of imperfection. So we have to work with what we have. And don't be, a plaything at the hands of your sankharas. The sankharas are ghosts. They don't exist until sati's out the door. When sati's out, the mouse, or the mice in this case, come to play. You cannot afford to send sati on a vacation, on a sick leave. Sati has to be always present, always, and doesn't have a sick day, doesn't need a sick day, if any. When you attain arahantship, you won't have to worry about it. At least that's what we see in the suttas. So, are there any thoughts, questions, comments? And it gets actually, I hope I don't make it sound mundane, but it gets juicier, the sutta, even more so by the next portion. And we see how Lord Buddha is giving specific tools. Using his life, you become the participant. You're sitting right next to him as if, and you're seeing inside of his mind and his mental working, his mental pattern, and his way of dealing with the fear. And you find yourself that you're not alone, that Lord Buddha was not this other godlike other being, superior being, who didn't have to deal with any of this stuff. No. You see how he also encountered fear at some point, and then what he did with that mechanism that he used, which is ingenious, which is incredible, which is so simple, he's going to have us be audiences or listen in on his thinking and how he dealt with it and how he grew out of it, which is brilliant. So the sutta is already available online, the PDF, but if you want, you can just read up on it, just like, wow, just see what I'm talking about instead of having to wait for a whole week. Hopefully we'll be able to do that portion next week. So if there aren't any, let me see, no comments, no questions. All right, let us transfer some merits. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahindika punyantang anumuditva chirang rakantu lokasasana. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahindika punyantang anumuditva chirang rakantu desana. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahindika punyantang anumuditva chirang rakantu Varanti Sam. May you all be well. May you not experience tension even on the surface of your skin and everything in between, everything below it. May your brain feel relaxed. May your throat feel relaxed. May your eyes smile. When you're walking, may your feet say thank you, thank you, thank you to you, or to something. Just being grateful. Whenever you're with the Dhamma, there's joy. Whenever you're not with the Dhamma, then you're with the khandhas, the aggregates, and you are with pain, with suffering. Lord Buddha wanted us to all taste joy. That's why we practice. Freedom from suffering is joy. That's wisdom. That's the gift of wisdom. Not to sit there and, unwise. There's joy. There's tons and tons of joy for the wise. And that's Dhamma. So I wish that for all of us and for all our loved ones' safety as well. And may the blessings of the Triple Gem be with you all. Until next time. Secure.